He spied on her, suspicious of every move. And then the truth came out. But would he be able to handle it? The mansion stood atop the hill like a sleeping beast, surrounded by high walls and trees that seemed to guard secrets. The wind blew through the window cracks as if trying to remind the place that the world outside still existed. But inside, time had stopped. Vicent Carter walked through the long corridors, where his own footsteps echoed like a foreign presence. He was a man of immeasurable wealth and equally vast loneliness. Since the death of his wife, Susan, during the birth of their first child, the luxury around him had seemed like nothing more than a mausoleum of memories. The baby, Peter, slept almost constantly, as if crying had grown tired of going unanswered. Vicent loved him. Of that he was certain. But this love was tinged with guilt. Guilt for not saving Susan, guilt for not knowing how to be a father. In recent months, the house had become a mirror of his mind. Cold, watched, with no open doors. Emma arrived on a foggy morning, punctual and calm. She carried a modest suitcase and a gaze that sought nothing beyond the necessary. There was an unsettling serenity about her, the kind of calm that makes your heart suspicious. Vicent observed every gesture, every word. "An agency sent me, Mr. Carter," she said in a polite but firm tone. He responded with the stiffness of someone who fears human contact. "Start with the kitchen, then the living room, and don't touch anything in the office." He paused. "And don't pick up the boy without my permission." Emma just smiled, as if she understood the wounds without needing to hear their stories. During the first few days, the silence between them was broken only by the sound of cloths being wrung, water dripping on the floor, and the baby's soft babbling. Until one afternoon, a different sound filled the air. A laugh. A child's laugh. Vicent froze, incredulous. He descended the stairs slowly and, before being seen, peered through the crack in the door. Emma was sitting on the floor next to the playpen. She hummed an old nursery rhyme, her soft voice blending with the golden light streaming through the window. Peter clapped his hands, laughing as if the world were safe again. The scene should have warmed Vicent's heart, but what he felt was a twinge of discomfort. That sound, absent for so long, felt forbidden. Why was his son smiling at her, and never at him? That night, Vicent made a decision. He discreetly called a technician and, without explanation, had cameras installed in every room. Living room, kitchen, hallways, the baby's room. The man hesitated. "Do you want hidden cameras?" "I want eyes that never sleep," Vicent replied, emotionless. When the system was completed, the billionaire felt a false sense of control. Now he could see everything, every gesture, every word. Or so he thought. In the first few days, the footage showed the obvious. Emma cleaned, cooked, and cared for the baby with almost maternal patience. But there was something about her that disarmed him and irritated him at the same time. She seemed to live to a different rhythm, the rhythm of people who have nothing to hide. And that, for Vicent, was the greatest mystery. One afternoon, he was watching the office footage when Emma stopped in front of the bookshelf. Her fingers touched the frame of an old photograph. Vicent, still a boy, between his parents, Henry and Alice. She stared at the portrait for a long moment, and her lips moved in a whisper that sent chills down his spine. "You have the same look as him, the same gentle way." Vicent recoiled in his chair, as if the words could physically hurt him. Him. Had she known his father? But how? He replayed the scene repeatedly, trying to decipher the tone, the look, the weight of the voice. Nothing seemed casual. Suddenly, the house felt smaller, more suffocating, and every blinking camera on the ceiling became an accusing eye. In the following days, he observed her even more closely. Emma smiled little, but her face seemed to carry a peace that was unsettling. At night, she would put the baby to sleep and remain there, still looking at the crib as if contemplating an old memory. One of those nights, Vicent saw her discreetly wipe away tears. His heart raced. Emma was crying. And once again she murmured, "The same look, the same gentle way. The repetition tormented him. Was it a coincidence? Nostalgia? A hidden message? The night stretched on, and Vicent, alone before the screens, realized he was trapped between two opposing certainties: that Emma was hiding something, and that perhaps it was he who no longer saw the world clearly. The image of her rocking the baby, softly singing, filled the dark office. Her voice crossed the walls and for a moment dissolved the heavy silence of the house. Vicent did not know if he was crying for his absent wife, the tenderness he could not feel for his son, or the fear that, in this home of cameras and ghosts, he was starting to be truly seen. The camera lights blinked, reflecting in his tired eyes. Across the room, Emma smiled, and Peter slept peacefully. On the screen, the house seemed alive, breathing, watching, waiting. And Vicent, the man who watched everything, did not realize that he was already beginning to be the one watched. Vicent's nights had grown far too long. The clock in the living room always seemed stuck at the same hour, midnight, when he was still in front of the screens, watching. Blinking cameras, recording devices running, digital eyes scattered in every corner of the mansion. It was as if the entire house were breathing through those devices. Emma appeared on the screen like a serene apparition. She moved lightly through the rooms, the apron tied around her waist, her hair simply pulled back. There was something almost ritualistic in her movements. She swept the floor as if meditating, dusted the furniture as if talking to memories. Vicent watched everything with the attention of an investigator, or a man on the verge of losing his mind. In the first few weeks, he began taking notes. Times, movements, expressions. She moves the living room window at 2:45 p.m. She looks at Susan's portrait at 4 p.m. Smiles to herself at 6:10 p.m. Each line filled a dark-covered notebook, as if truth could be found in repetition. But the more he watched, the less certain he became. Emma seemed every day more human, and that confused him. In the mornings, the sound of childish laughter cut through the mansion's silence. Peter, who had barely reacted to his father's touch before, now clapped his hands, tried to hum nonsensical words. Emma lifted him in her arms and twirled him around, filling the air with the scent of soap and warm milk. The baby laughed loudly, and sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting the cold walls gold. Vicent, from the office, listened, and every laugh felt like a cruel reminder of his own inadequacy. He watched his son smile at a stranger and felt a jealousy he could not name. It was as if Emma had crossed an invisible boundary, the space between duty and affection. In the afternoons, when she saw him in the hallway, she greeted him politely. "Do you need anything, sir?" she asked, always kindly. "No, just checking things," he replied dryly, trying to hide the confusion in his voice. But deep down, Vicent no longer knew if he was watching out of caution or fascination. There was something in the way Emma existed that both attracted and irritated him. Her simplicity wounded his distrust. One rainy afternoon brought the moment that would change everything. Vicent was returning from the office when he heard, through the slightly open door of the baby's room, Emma's low voice. She was speaking to Peter, tenderly, as if the boy could understand every word. "You're so much like your grandfather, Henry," she said, smiling, "and you have the same sweet way your mother, Susan, had." Vicent froze. It felt as if the blood had drained from his entire body. The name of his father, the name of his wife, two untouchable memories, spoken with familiarity. How could she know them? Emma, unaware of his presence, continued rocking the baby. Vicent took a silent step back, his heart pounding in his ears. Her words echoed in his head like an ancient whisper. "Henry. Susan." Later, when Emma retired to the staff quarters, Vicent could not resist the urge. He waited for the sound of the shower to stop, waited for silence to settle, and descended the stairs on light steps. Her bag was on the kitchen chair, small worn leather. Vicent looked around, hesitated, and then opened the clasp. Among tissues and papers, something glimmered discreetly under the cold ceiling light, a silver locket. He held it with trembling hands. The metal was warm, as if it held the heat of a body. When he opened it, the world seemed to tilt beneath his feet. Inside, an old photograph. His father, Henry Carter, smiling. Next to him, a woman Vicent did not recognize. Embracing, intimate, as if sharing a story that had been erased. Vicent took a deep breath, trying to remain lucid. But his mind had already begun weaving theories. Could Emma be Henry's illegitimate daughter? Had she returned seeking inheritance, revenge, recognition? Or was she a blackmailer, sent by someone who knew the Carter family's secrets? He returned the locket to its place with the care of an experienced thief. But the damage had already been done. The object would haunt him. During the early hours, Vicent returned to the surveillance room. The screens showed Emma sleeping peacefully, her face serene, the baby asleep in the crib beside her. In the dim light, the image seemed almost sacred, and yet he saw threat in every shadow. Fear and curiosity battled within him until he no longer knew which one moved him. The clock struck 3 a.m. Vicent wrote one last line in the notebook. She knows more than she should. Then he turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of the blinking cameras like eyes that never sleep. The house now seemed different, alive and silent, full of unanswered questions. And Vicent, sitting before the screens, understood that the line between truth and paranoia had become too thin to see. On the main screen, Emma turned in her sleep, a faint smile drawing across her lips. Smiles and shadows. That was all that remained within that house. The sun on that Tuesday morning rose pale, filtered through dense clouds that seemed to weigh down the city. Vicent woke up early but didn't leave his room. He had an important contract to sign at the construction company, but the idea of facing the world outside felt irrelevant compared to the enigma that lived inside his house. The surveillance screens, arranged across the mahogany desk in his office, blinked like beacons in the fog. On each screen, a fragment of the daily routine. The silent hallway, the crib, the kitchen, the garden. And at the center of it all, Emma. The woman he still didn't know whether he should fear or admire. Since discovering the locket, Vicent had become a shadow within his own home. He moved silently, observing more than living. With cold coffee in his cup and the notebook open, he recorded everything, as if trying to decipher an ancient language. On the largest screen, Emma placed Peter on a colorful rug. Morning light filtered through the curtains, creating a soft glow on the floor. She held his hands, laughing in a way Vicent hadn't heard in a long time. "Come on, champ," she said in a sweet voice. "One step at a time." The boy giggled, hesitant. Vicent leaned over the desk, bringing his face closer to the screen. Trembling hands, racing heart, as if the fate of his very soul depended on this moment. Emma released one of the baby's hands, then the other. Peter wobbled, tottering, a bird about to discover its wings. One step, then another. And then, as if the entire world were holding its breath, he crossed the small space between them and fell into her arms. "You did it, my love," exclaimed Emma, crying and laughing at the same time. "You walked." She held him close to her chest, her face buried in the child's fine hair. Vicent, alone before the screens, felt his chest split in two. One part pride, the other, a pain he didn't know how to place. Peter had walked, but not to him. His son's first steps had been towards someone else, a woman he had hired with suspicion, someone who watched from the shadows and judged in silence. Tears came without warning. Vicent wiped them quickly, angrily, as if refusing to give in. But something inside him had already surrendered. That image, the purity of that moment, wounded him irreversibly. For a moment, he wanted to run to the living room, hug his son, thank Emma. But reason, or fear, kept him frozen, just observing, with the same cold gaze as always. Emma lifted the boy and twirled him in the air. Peter's laughter echoed through the house, filling every room with a joy Vicente no longer knew how to produce. The mansion, once a silent tomb, now seemed alive, and he was the only one dead inside. The day dragged on. Emma prepared lunch, put Peter down for a nap, cleaned the kitchen. Vicente watched it all, without the courage to face his own reflection in the screens. When night fell, the emptiness returned. The ticking of the clock sounded louder, the air heavier. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the first in months, and stared into the dark glass of the window. His reflection stared back, a man who had everything except peace. Emma's words, spoken days earlier, returned to his mind like an invisible needle. "You're so much like your grandfather Henry." The father, the locket, the photo. Vicente swirled the glass in his hands. He could no longer pretend this was a coincidence. She knew things no one should know, and now she had what he loved most. He set the glass on the table and stood up. Every step to the hallway sounded like a decision. The house slept, but he did not. He opened the office door and called in a firm voice, "Emma." She appeared at the doorway a few seconds later, surprised, drying her hands on her apron. "You called me, sir?" Vicente pointed to the chair across the desk. "Sit down." Emma obeyed, her smile gradually fading in front of his icy expression. The yellow light of the lamp cast long shadows on the walls, like silent specters. Vicente held his gaze fixed on her. "I'll be direct." "Of course. Who are you?" She blinked, confused. I don't understand, sir." He leaned forward. "You speak of my father as if you knew him. You know my wife's name. You have a locket with a photo of my father, and a woman I've never seen in my life. So tell me, Emma." His voice trembled, caught between anger and fear. "Who are you?" The silence that followed was almost tangible, dense like the air before a storm. Emma lowered her eyes, hands folded in her lap. For a moment, Vicente thought she might cry, but she only drew a deep, long, resigned breath and lifted her gaze. In her eyes was something Vicente hadn't expected, neither guilt nor fear, only truth. The clock struck midnight. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. And inside the office, Vicente's world on the verge of collapse began with a single sound, the silence before the revelation. The office was plunged in shadow, lit only by the yellow glow of the lamp. Shadows danced along the walls, reflecting the tension that hung in the air. Vicente remained silent, his eyes fixed on Emma, waiting for any sign, any word that could explain the enigma haunting him. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. The silence was almost unbearable, as if the house itself were holding its breath. "Vicente," she began, her voice fragile, breaking into small waves. I need to tell you the truth." He didn't blink, didn't speak, just stared at her. That cold gaze which had been used to watch, intimidate, and distrust was now the only shelter for his own disbelief. "I am Eleanor Pyrrhus's daughter," she finally said, letting the words fall like heavy stones. "Eleanor?" Vicente raised an eyebrow, his voice dry but tinged with intense curiosity. Emma nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "She was the family's former housekeeper. When I was a child, we went through very difficult times. My mother cared for us alone, without support, without money, until one day she fell ill. She had a heart condition." Vicente felt his chest tighten. He remembered Eleanor vaguely, that small, discreet woman who always seemed to vanish into the shadows of the house. He never imagined that her story could intertwine with that of his own daughter. "My father, Henry," Emma continued, her voice trembling, "saved her life. Not just with the hospital, not just with the surgery, but by making sure everything was done with care, attention, and kindness. He gave her hope, Vicente. And before my mother left the operation, he gave her this locket. She took the silver object from her pocket and gently placed it on the desk. He said I should remember that there are still good people in the world. Vicent looked at the locket, the same one that had caused sleepless nights and suspicions. The old photograph of Henry with an unknown woman. Now it made sense. It was not a sign of threat, secret, or blackmail. It was a symbol of gratitude. Emma continued, her voice now firmer, despite the silent tears streaming down her face. I grew up hearing stories about your father's kindness, about how he treated those around him with respect, care, and generosity. I promised myself, and I promised him too, that one day I would repay that in some way. Vicent swallowed hard. That rigid, suspicious billionaire man, with a life built on contracts and power, felt something break inside him. A wall of iron, built over years of disappointment and fear, began to crumble. You're saying you came here? For that? He asked, his voice hoarse, barely under control. Emma nodded, leaning slightly forward, her eyes shining in the dim light. I didn't come for money, Vicent. I didn't come for status or revenge. So, he swallowed, feeling the weight of his heart crushing him. So you're here to fulfill a promise? She smiled faintly, as if returning to life the light that had seemed lost. Yes, for my mother, and for you, for everyone who was ever kind to me. Silence settled, dense and absolute. Vicent felt his disbelief dissolve into something more complex, a mixture of shame, relief, pain, and, for the first time in weeks, hope. He had accused, spied on, and doubted her, but all of that seemed small compared to her sincerity. Vicent's breath grew heavy. He suddenly realized that his suspicions were not only about Emma, but about himself, about his inability to trust, his fear of losing again, the loneliness that surrounded him like a fortress. Emma, seeing the subtle transformation, leaned a little closer. Vicent, I just wanted you to understand. Her voice was almost a whisper, but carried the full weight of truth. Everything I do here is to protect Peter and honor the kindness your family showed my mother. He closed his eyes for a moment. Tears sprang again, and this time he did not hold back. The weight of guilt, fear, and loneliness mingled with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Trust. Vicent looked at her finally. The man who had hidden behind cameras, notebooks, and constant surveillance understood that he had underestimated the strength of someone who acts with heart. Emma was not an intruder, nor a threat. She was the bridge between past and present, between the kindness that had been offered and the promise that needed to be fulfilled. So, you came for Peter too, he said, his voice softer than he imagined possible. Emma nodded, her eyes misty, the smile lighting up her tired face. Always for Peter, always for him. The locket gleamed under the lamp's light, reflecting not only silver but stories of loyalty, gratitude, and love that spanned generations. Vicent finally realized that wealth is not measured in money, but in trust and kindness, and that sometimes the most important person in life arrives in disguise, carrying promises and memories that only the heart can decipher. In the office silence, with the locket on the desk and rain tapping against the windows, Vicent felt the first spark of redemption. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe that life could still be good. The office was in complete silence, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. Vicent remained seated, the locket still between his fingers, as if he were holding not just metal, but an entire story that was finally beginning to unfold. Emma stood, eyes glistening, breathing unevenly. The silence between them was heavy, charged with anticipation and truths about to be revealed. Vicent, she began, her voice trembling. There's something more, something I need you to know. He lifted his gaze, tired and cautious, but curious. More, he murmured, his hoarse voice almost failing. She took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears threatening to fall. The second promise, she said, approaching the desk slowly, as if each word carried enough weight to break the floor beneath her feet. "It's the promise I made to your wife, Susan." Vicent swallowed hard. The name of his beloved deceased over a year ago still echoed in his memory with a mixture of pain and longing. He didn't know what to expect. When Susan was admitted to the clinic, Emma continued, her voice almost a whisper, "I was a nurse's assistant. I was on duty when she arrived, in a complicated labor." "Complicated," Vicent repeated, his throat dry. "Yes," she breathed deeply, closing her eyes for a moment. Her heart went into collapse. Before being taken for emergency surgery, she held my hand tightly and said, almost breathless, "If I don't make it back, take care of my baby." The weight of those words fell on Vicent like a cold winter rain. The world seemed to tilt, the silence of the house filled with the echo of the past. Emma continued, her voice choked. "I promised, Vicent, and when I discovered that the baby, Peter, was the son of the man my father admired so much, I realized that fate was giving me the chance to fulfill a greater mission. It wasn't just about taking care of the child. It was about honoring Henry's kindness, fulfilling my mother's promise and your wife's." Vicent felt his breath catch. The mind that, until moments before, had doubted every gesture of Emma's, now struggled to comprehend the magnitude of the truth. There was no manipulation, no financial interest. She was there out of love, gratitude, and loyalty. Without thinking, Vicent stood. He walked to the wall safe, his hands still trembling, his heart racing as if it could beat right through his chest. He turned the key, felt the cold metal, and opened it slowly. Inside, an old letter, carefully kept among yellowed envelopes aged by time. He picked it up, opened it with slightly shaking hands, and began to read. "If one day Eleanor's children need help, assist them. It's the least we can do for someone who is loyal and trustworthy. With love, Henry Carter." Vicent let the letter fall onto the desk, his chest tight. The confirmation of everything Emma had said was before him, undeniable and clear. The locket, the story of her mother, Susan's promise. Everything fit together, forming a mosaic that spanned generations. Emma watched him, tears silently sliding down her face, yet never averting her gaze. "Vicent," she said, her voice soft, almost a prayer. "I am not a threat. I never was. I am only the link between what was good in the past and what can still be in the present." The billionaire man, accustomed to controlling everything with contracts and surveillance, felt an emotion he could not buy. The truth, finally revealed, dismantled every wall of distrust he had built around his heart. He stepped closer, silent, unsure whether to embrace her or simply remain there, absorbing every word. The office, once cold and silent, now seemed smaller, yet more human. The locket on the desk gleamed under the lamp, a silent witness to a legacy of kindness Vicent was beginning to understand. I don't know what to say," Vicent murmured, finally letting his voice falter. "All this time, I judged you without reason." Emma smiled faintly, wiping her tears. "You were only protecting your son." Her voice was compassionate, almost maternal. "There is nothing to forgive." Silence returned, but no longer heavy. It was a silence of understanding, of newly discovered complicity, of a truth finally taking its place. And for the first time, Vicent felt that surveillance was no longer necessary. There was no more danger, only trust, and the promise to care for Peter and honor the generations that came before them. The clock struck midnight. The wind shook the curtains as if the house exhaled in relief. Vicent looked at Emma and finally smiled. A restrained but genuine smile. He no longer needed cameras, suspicion, or fear. The truth was clear. Emma was not just an employee. She was the guardian of promises, the link between past and present, the symbol that true kindness spans generations. And in that moment, Vicent realized that, at last, the house was alive, filled with smiles, trust, and renewed hope. The The morning sun bathed the Carter mansion in a soft, golden light, warming every corner with an unexpected glow. The house, once cold and silent, still carried echoes of loneliness, but something had changed irrevocably. Vicent was in the office, the locket resting on the desk, reflecting the sunlight filtering through the curtains. The weight of months of distrust had vanished, replaced by a rare feeling, understanding. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and finally felt he could allow himself to feel again. When Emma entered, hesitating at the doorway, he smiled. "Emma," he said, his voice light but filled with emotion. "I need to apologize." She furrowed her brow slightly, surprised, but waited. "I judged you, spying, doubting, all without reason." Vicent gestured toward the recently disabled cameras, now useless. "All the cameras are gone. And I want you to know, you no longer need to be my employee. I want you to stay here, not out of obligation. I want you to stay as part of the family." Emma felt her heart race, tears welling in her eyes, but this time not from sadness, rather from relief and quiet joy. "Vicent, she began, but he raised his hand, interrupting her with a gentle gesture. "You don't need to say anything. Just come," he said, opening his arms, offering a trust he hadn't felt in a long time. At that moment, Peter ran from the crib laughing and hugged Emma tightly. "Aunt Emma!" he exclaimed, with a purity and joy that lit up the entire hallway. Vicent watched, moved, the scene he once thought impossible. The woman he had once judged as dangerous, the stranger who had brought smiles to the son he didn't know how to raise, was now the invisible bond connecting past, present, and future. She bent down, laughing through tears, and embraced Peter tenderly. "Look at you, my little champion," she said, her voice soft, almost melodious. "Today we're going to play, learn, and laugh a lot." Vicent felt something inside him loosen, an old knot that had bound him to loneliness and distrust. Love and kindness, he thought, cannot be bought. They arrive in disguise, silently, like those who ask for nothing in return, only wishing to fulfill promises made from the heart. Later, in the main room, Vicent placed the locket in an old wooden frame. Next to it, the photograph of Henry, Eleanor, and Susan seemed to smile at them. Now the locket was not just silver and paper. It was history, legacy, and memory, the link that transformed a house into a home. Peter's laughter echoed through the corridors. Emma, now officially Aunt Emma, ran after him, teaching new words, new games, filling every room with joy. And Vicent, for the first time in a long while, entered the room without hurry, without fear, simply observing. The man who had once locked away his heart behind cameras and distrust now allowed himself to feel life pulsing all around him. He approached the window, taking a deep breath, and looked out at the garden bathed in late morning light. The world seemed larger, yet closer at the same time. And in the silence, he understood a truth that spanned generations. True kindness cannot be bought. Trust cannot be imposed. And sometimes angels arrive disguised as ordinary people, carrying lockets, promises, and smiles that change life forever. Vicent looked at Peter and Emma together, laughing, running, learning, living. And then he smiled. Not a smile of wealth or power, but the smile of someone who had finally learned that the true treasure lies in trust, love, and gratitude preserved across generations. The mansion, once cold and silent, now breathed. With laughter, memories, and fulfilled promises, it glowed from within. And Vicent knew in that moment that this house finally had light. After all this story, if you feel that trust and kindness can truly change lives, share in the comments. Who would you trust with your eyes closed? And if this story touched your heart, leave a like and join our channel, where stories like this come to life.